Princess Nicolette Péon sat at her writing desk, staring hesitantly at a blank sheet of paper. She couldn't shake the persistent feeling that she needed to act. At last, she decided to heed that quiet, insistent voice. With a sigh, she picked up her pen and scribbled a hasty message. When she rang for her maid, her hands trembled. Was she making a mistake? Could she trust the servant? The maid took the message with a curtsy and hurried away. Still trembling, Nicolette walked to the window and looked out. The island of Le Pays des Cygnes lay before her like a picturesque tapestry, green hills, vineyards, and sunlit harbors. The day was so clear she could even make out the distant coast of France on the horizon. The year 1789 was one of tumultuous change, shaking the very foundations of the French monarchy. In August, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen was published, inspired by Enlightenment ideals and proclaiming that men are born free and equal in rights. Liberty, equality, and fraternity became the slogans of a new era transforming the kingdom into a republic. Discussions of this document spread even into the intellectual circles of the tranquil island of Le Pays des Cygnes, mingling with both fear and hope. Nicolette herself did not feel that anything was fundamentally wrong with their kingdom, yet the voices calling for change were growing louder. At first glance, everything seemed to function, but nothing worked well. The land resembled an old clockwork, jammed, rusted, ticking unevenly. Many felt the tiny kingdom lagged behind the rest of Europe, now stirred by the ideals of humanism and the Enlightenment, and that it was heading nowhere. Long ago, Le Pays des Cygnes had been a bastion of Protestantism, a refuge for persecuted Christians from France. They had brought zeal, diligence, and new ideas that had enlivened the island. Every schoolchild knew the fateful dates, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre of 1572, the Edict of Nantes in 1598, and its revocation in 1685, when Louis XIV issued the Edict of Fontainebleau, renewing the persecution of Protestants. Now, more than a century later, the French Revolution had arrived, and with it the Declaration, promising that no one may be persecuted for their opinions, whether religious or otherwise, provided they do not break the law. A new era of freedom was dawning in France. Paradoxically, on Le Pays des Cygnes, each of these great historical events had had the opposite effect. Waves of persecution brought new blood to the island, families of artisans, merchants, doctors, and scholars. Thanks to them, the kingdom had grown and flourished for centuries. But now it seemed the small nation was running out of breath. No new people arrived, no new ideas came. And the people began to call for change. Nicolette had no idea what this would mean for her, for the island, or for the uncertain future unfolding before them. Edward Sandcreek stared in confusion at the message he had just received, then looked at the maid who had delivered it. "Who sent you?" he asked thoughtfully. "I'm not allowed to say," the young woman replied firmly. "How do I know this is trustworthy?" Edward asked hesitantly. The maid shook her head. "I don't know what it's about, sir. But the message comes from someone close to the king." With that, she gave a perfect curtsy and headed for the door. Edward glanced upward but didn't have time to voice the question forming on his lips. A thought flashed through his mind with absolute certainty, run like the wind. And with it came a sudden idea, how to save the person the message concerned. Rector Adrien Boucher was one of the island's most influential thinkers, Edward's former teacher, and a man who had recently dared to criticize the monarchy openly and repeatedly. The message Edward received warned that the king's guards were preparing to arrest him. Agitated, Edward went to the room his late mother had occupied until recently and began rummaging through her belongings, frowning in confusion. The island had once been a haven for those yearning for freedom and new ideas, and Edward counted himself among them. A well-known writer, he taught at the local university and had increasingly taken on duties as an assistant preacher in his congregation. He was a familiar and beloved figure on the island. Was the desire for freedom and progress suddenly to become a crime? Had their kingdom truly grown so backward? Until now, critics had said the monarchy was like a cart standing still. Now, it seemed the aging king was preparing to take a step backward, and that motionless cart was about to roll in reverse. Edward packed a neat bundle of clothes and slipped a pouch of money into his pocket. Then he ran toward the university. Fortunately, it wasn't far, but it seemed he was too late. From a distance, he saw royal guards approaching the main entrance. Luckily, he knew the university well and realized it would take the guards some time to navigate its maze of corridors. So he veered off the path and sprinted across the grass to a side entrance. He reached the rector's office in moments, but guessed they had no more than 5 minutes. In a few hurried sentences, he blurted out the situation to his friend and hustled the stunned rector to a nearby restroom. There, he unpacked the bundle, and while the rector changed, Edward opened a window. 3 minutes later, as the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor, 2 nimble figures leaped from the window. After turning a corner, one transformed into a hunched old woman leaning on a young man. Her shoes were slightly too large, and a keen observer might have noticed they were men's boots, but from a distance, the illusion was convincing. Men in that era, fortunately, were clean-shaven. The rector, slightly plump with soft features, lacked any sharp masculine traits. A large bonnet hid his hair, a shawl draped over his jacket, and a long skirt concealed the rest of him. Still, the improvised disguise needed refinement before Adrien Boucher could board a ship and escape to nearby France. After adding a wig and a thorough shave at a local inn, the rector was ready for the journey. Edward escorted him to the main port in the town of Rouge. He couldn't help but notice more guards than usual patrolling the harbor. The royal guards were clearly watching the port after failing to find the rector at the university. The old woman with a bundle, clinging to her young escort, fortunately drew no attention. The rector boarded the first ship bound for France, and Edward watched his friend leave their homeland with a strange mix of regret and satisfaction at a job well done. People are fleeing to France for freedom now? He thought bitterly. It used to be the other way around. Edward lingered for a moment, watching as the ship caught the wind and slipped out over the swelling waves. Just as he turned to leave the bustling port, he noticed, out of the corner of his eye, 2 royal guards speaking urgently with a young student not far from the quay. The student looked nervous, glancing around uneasily, then gave a small, reluctant shrug. One of the guards pressed a few coins into his palm. After a brief hesitation, the young man slowly raised his hand, and pointed straight at Edward. Edward's stomach clenched. He was trapped. Someone must have glimpsed him helping the rector climb out of the university window. The guards, who didn't know Edward by sight, had clearly brought the student along, and bribed him to reveal who had aided Adrien Boucher's escape. As the student's trembling hand singled him out, Edward saw the guards' expressions harden. Their eyes narrowed as they turned toward him. "Stop. In the name of the king," one of them shouted. Edward didn't stop. Instead, he slipped between 2 carts and sprinted along the crowded quay, hoping to buy the rector more time and draw the guards' attention away from the ship, which was still dangerously close to the harbor. His boots rang against the uneven cobblestones, and for an instant he nearly slipped on a coil of rope, but caught his balance. Behind him, the guards crashed through crates and startled bystanders, shouting after him. At the edge of the harbor, Edward finally stopped, breathing hard, and turned to face them. The guards slowed, weapons half-drawn. Edward raised his hands in surrender. "So, you really thought you could escape us?" one of them panted. Edward managed a faint, almost conciliatory smile. "Not really," he said. "I only wanted to feel the sea breeze one last time." "Where is Rector Boucher?" the guard barked, his voice sharp with anger. Edward's smile turned quietly ironic, though his tone stayed polite. "You see, the whole point of everything I've done today," he said, "was so you wouldn't find out." The guard's face darkened. "That insolence will cost you dearly," he warned. Edward gave a small shrug. "I'm sorry to have made you run so far," he replied mildly. "But I suppose keeping fit is part of your duty." With that, he stepped closer and offered them his wrists. The guards muttered something under their breath and each seized him firmly by an arm. Surprised by his calm and sudden cooperation, they decided there was no need to bind him. As they led him back through the busy port, Edward cast one last look toward the ship, now safely distant from shore. Despite what awaited him, a quiet sense of satisfaction took hold within him. Adrien Boucher was safe, and that had been his only goal.